Scripture this morning is from Exodus 3, 1 through 6, and verse 10. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't burning up." When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals because you are standing on holy ground." He continued, "I am the God of your father, Abram's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And then verse 10, God said, "So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt."
A couple of things I found on Facebook this week I just wanted to share with you. If the grass looks greener on the other side, stop staring and stop comparing and stop complaining and start watering the grass that you're standing on. Another one was this one. God doesn't stop the bad things from happening. That's never been part of the promise. The promise is, I am with you. I am with you now until the end of time. One day, I'd like to turn on the news and hear that there's peace on earth. How about you? I'd just love to hear that. Well, I think that this message about Moses and the burning bush and listening to God's voice in our own lives is what will bring us peace on earth. But I want to start out with a little joke that reminds me that we're kind of in this together. Do you know why you never see any dead crows on the road? Well, it's because for every one on the road, there's two up in a tree and they're saying, "Caw, caw." We're in this together. We are. This life quest that we're on, it's not a journey that anybody takes alone. You've affected people around you in ways that you'll never know. You've made a difference, and you continue to make a difference, and we continue to touch each other's lives and draw each other closer to God when we listen to God's voice. Well, just to review, the first week we talked about how God has a dream for you, and it's a bigger dream than you've ever had for yourself. It's a dream that'll take you places in different ways that you've never thought possible. And our author called it a BHAG, a big, hairy, atrocious God purpose. Playing on that BHAG from the business world. And he said that someday is the enemy of today. Don't put it off till someday, or you'll miss out on the gift of today. Well, then this last week, the last lesson we had talked a little bit about our identity, and it asked the question, where do you see the greatest need? Because your gifts can help to meet that need. And it talked about our priority, and an image that I didn't use in church, but I used afterwards in the lesson was he said, you know, if you were going to make a tattoo for yourself, something that was permanent, what would you put on there? What's the most important thing in your life that makes a difference? What would you tattoo yourself with? And he said we Christians, sometimes we have a lack of our own identity. And as an example, he said he went to a Harley Davidson convention one time, and he said, talked to the people there, and he says, well, you know, I mean, we're Harley people. We've got tattoos that say Harley. He says, you don't see anybody with a Honda tattoo, do you? You never do. We church people should have at least as strong of an identity as the Harley people. What is the most important thing in our life? And that's what we want to be working on during this sermon series. All the ifs in life. And like I said, God has a dream for you that's bigger than we can possibly imagine. It's up to us to let it unfold and let it lead us forward. The author talked about 3 stages of life, and I want to talk about that now. Now, Moses, he said, took about 40 years apiece to get through these 3 stages. So this is not an overnight thing most of the time. Sometimes it is, and I'll talk about one instance of that being an overnight thing. But Moses was, first of all, he was in the empire building stage. He was building his life. He was building all the things that he thought he needed in life, or sometimes we call it ladder climbing. When I heard the word empire building, I flashed back to my childhood. And Grandpa was working on the railroad, and the passenger train that went through Williston, North Dakota was the Empire Builder. You've heard of that one? I don't know, maybe you have. But it ran from Chicago all the way out to Seattle, and right here somewhere is Williston, North Dakota. On a slow day, we'd go down to the train station just to watch it come in. Isn't that something? But the Empire Builder, every time I got on it, it was just an amazing ride. And we rode it quite often to get to Grandpa's house and Grandma's house out in Montana. The thing about it is that it was named after a person. You've heard of James Hill, the guy that started the Great Northern Railway, and others. You probably know more about him than I do. I didn't realize that he was from St. Paul and had this beautiful house on Summit Avenue, But his nickname was the Empire Builder. And that's how they got the name for the train. A man who really was trying to build the best life he possibly could. Now, in doing that, we can easily fall to temptations. And the 3 temptations that Jesus faced were empire-building temptations. Satan said to him, let's turn this stone into bread. Talk about the appetite that we have for things. And Jesus passed that temptation. There's a temptation for approval, to find approval. And Satan said, go ahead, jump off of the pinnacle of the temple. God won't let you hurt yourself. You've got that approval from God. It'll be okay. And the third part of this empire building is really all about ambition. Satan said to Jesus, I'll give you the world. That's what you came for anyway, right? To change the world. I'll give you the whole world. Just worship me. So that's a little bit of insight into empire building. And the first 40 years of Moses' life were spent doing that. Second comes along disillusionment. Sometimes we refer to it as a midlife crisis nowadays, And Moses kind of had one of those. He ended up out in the desert taking care of his father-in-law's flock. And he was supposed to be the king of Egypt, wasn't he? He was supposed to be the Pharaoh, but here he is in this crisis situation. And in the middle of this crisis, God speaks to him. That happens quite often. Our author talks about how, as a young man, he ended up getting arrested, and that was his crisis moment. When he realized he came out of jail, and he went back to his folks, and he says, I think God wants me to be a pastor. And his folks, of course, poo-pooed it, oh yeah, it's another one of your things, that'll last 6 months, But sometimes it happens. We are really looking for the third stage, where we turn aside from our lives And we look and we see what more could be there. We're looking for the fire that won't go out. And in Moses' life, in verse 3, it says that he turned aside, he checked it out, he took time away, and he was able to listen to God's voice. Now, if you're wondering what stage of life you may be in, I mean, it's natural to wonder, and some people live in empire building their whole lives, and some people are stuck in a crisis situation for a long time, and others are, we bounce back and forth sometimes too, don't we? But think about what you're praying. That might help you to discover where you might be. If you're praying, God bless me. God, help me out. I need some help here. Help me to be a blessing to others. If you're thinking of only yourself, you're probably in the empire building stage. And we all have prayers like that. If you're praying, God save me, then you know you're in a crisis situation. And you know that God is there for you. But sometimes it doesn't feel like it, does it? Not at all. Until we have that burning bush moment and our life is changed and our prayer changes as well to God, use me. Boy, I wish the whole world was there. God, use me to make a difference. Our life mission, which is what we're trying to discover as we meet together during these weeks, it always is connected to God's redemptive mission. God is here to redeem the world, to bring his kingdom on earth. And there's a phrase that our author used, but I heard it used years and years ago by a bishop in the Dakotas, Mike Coyner. He says, I don't want to play at church anymore. I want to be the church. So many people play at church. Sometimes I hear people say that, I'm a member of this church or whatever, and then I ask the pastor, I hear that this person's at your church, yeah, and they say, who? Who? Well, if we're affiliated with the church, don't you think the pastor should know about it? So many people play at church rather than try to be the church. The church is not just about the organization. The church is living our lives with God's greatest commandment to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's what it's all about. How do we hear God's voice? Well, it's a good question. I want to share one example with you here today. This is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. As you come into this part of the building, this building here, and you have to walk across and downward, across the abyss on this ramp and get into this place that it's just pretty depressing, But it's really an amazing place. I would recommend you go there if you ever get over to Israel. But I say this because there's a man that has got a tree planted in his name on what they call the Avenue of the Righteous among the nations. That is, the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people that have stood up for the Jewish people. And there's been a movie about him recently. His name is Oskar Schindler. And this guy was not a nice man. Let's put it that way. He was a womanizer. He had more mistresses than I've got fingers. He moved from Germany to Poland to be close to Dachau so he could use the Jewish camp labor so that he could make money making cookware for the Germans. Just took advantage of the situation completely. And one day he was out riding horse with one of his mistresses, and they looked down and they saw Dachau, and they saw the Nazi soldiers drag the people out, and shoot them. In that moment, Oskar Schindler went from stage 1 to stage 3. God used me. And you remember the story. I don't remember the numbers, but it was in the thousands. The thousands of people. He turned around and he kept making money, but he used all of his money to get Jewish people out of there. And he saved thousands and thousands of people. Sometimes it happens overnight. Sometimes you're stuck in a stage for 40 years like Moses was. But Oskar Schindler, he's not buried here, but he's buried on Mount Zion. There's not a lot of non-Jewish people that are buried on Mount Zion. It looks like they kind of squeezed his grave in between a couple other graves, doesn't it? It says, the unforgotten lifesaver is what it says, roughly translated from the German. The unforgotten lifesaver. God used me. The point is that if God can change a slime ball like Oskar Schindler in a moment, God can surely work in our lives in 40 years. We need to turn aside, to look at that burning bush, and to let God change us. And to find that fire that will not be extinguished, that leads us to a life renewed and refreshed. That burning bush is kind of a life. You know, how do we hear that burning bush speaking to us? In the movie, this slide is from the Prince of Egypt movie, the Disney, I believe it was, cartoon. The voice of Moses was played by Val Kilmer. And they brought in different people to try to figure, different theologians, what should we do for the voice of God? And you know whose voice they picked? They picked Val Kilmer's voice. Because most often we hear God speaking through our own hearts, don't we? Sometimes through a friend. But somehow, the whisper of voice that gets louder and louder and louder in the movie, and I'd recommend you check out the movie, go ahead and rent it. It's a wonderful movie. God's voice comes from within our hearts. And all we need to do is let it out. My favorite verse, one of my favorite verses, I should say, and I have many, Philippians 1:6, where Paul says, I'm sure about this. The one who started a good work in you will stay with you to complete it by the day of Jesus Christ. I read an article this week about a former atheist named Nicole. She wrote an article that she called How God Messed Up My Happy Atheist Life. And this is what she said. In the article, she tells the story of her happy life, a professional and personal success, as she describes a very pleasant adult life of firm atheism. The story of her conversion is interesting, but what caught my attention was Nicole's commentary about how life was different for her after she became a follower of Jesus. She writes, my Christian conversion has granted me no simplicity. It has complicated all of my relationships, changed how I feel about money, messed up my public persona, and made me wonder if I should be on Twitter at all. Obviously, it has been very beautiful. God used me. So at this point, we need to think really about where we are in life so that we can always move forward. Do we slip backwards? Do we need to come forward? What is your big, hairy, audacious God purpose? And we need to put it into practice. That's what we're working toward during this sermon series. Sometimes we're not asked to begin, but we're asked to begin again. And what I want to do now is to share a prayer with you. I would like to ask you to pray with me the Wesleyan Covenant Renewal prayer. It's going to be on the screen. So let's be in an attitude of prayer, shall we? Lord, I am no longer my own, but thine. Put me to what thou wilt. Rank me with whom thou wilt. Put me to doing, put me to suffering. Let me be employed by thee, or laid aside for thee. Exalted for thee, or brought low for thee. Let me be full, let me be empty. Let me have all things, let me have nothing. I freely and heartily yield all things to thy pleasure and disposal. And now, O glorious and blessed God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, thou art mine, and I am thine. So be it. And the covenant which I have made on earth, let it be ratified in heaven. Amen.